Hello, everyone. Welcome to Designing Composition 101. My name is Jack Parra. I'm the Artist Alley Coordinator for Double Exposure. I'm a freelance game illustrator and book illustrator. I've done work for card games, board games, tabletop RPGs, and I'm currently illustrating the third in a trilogy of kids' novels. Would you like to
And
introduce?
oh,
Go ahead.
sorry. I'm Melissa Gay. I am also a freelance illustrator. I got my start in scientific illustration and then swiftly moved into where I really wanted to be, tabletop role-playing games. And I have illustrated many small to large press games throughout my career. And I've also done some sci-fi book cover illustration and a bunch of other random marketing stuff like we freelance illustrators do.
Okay, so basically the way I like to do panels that I run is I have an outline that I work off of and touch on subjects. And if anyone has questions throughout, feel free to ask them through the Twitch chat, and they'll they'll be what's it called prompted to us, and we can answer them for you. Okay, so to start, composition is a little of one of the tougher areas to directly teach because there's such a subjectiveness to it and a flow to it. Essentially, yes, it's about having a pleasing flow to your piece, but also it could be the opposite. It could be you don't want it to be pleasing, you want it to be jarring or erratic, and that's another way to approach it. But most of it comes with practice and looking at other people's compositions. But there's definitely some regular approaches that people use, and that's what we're going to cover. If you have any, most of what I have is pretty much works for everything, not just games, because it's kind of universal. But if you have anything specific about a game, a type of game situation, please ask.
I will jump in and say that at one point I heard someone describe composition as the language we artists use to communicate our vision for a picture to the audience. And I think I've seen Jack's outline, and it will outline some of these this visual linguistics that will help you communicate better.
Exactly. So to start off, there's a list that, as an illustrator or as a client talking to an illustrator, that we need to know. So first is you need to know the final dimensions and the orientation of your piece, meaning its size and is it vertical or horizontal, or square. This is very important. I once had a client change from a square to a rectangle in the end stage on me,
Oh no.
and and it was a little interesting to. Thankfully, it was a digital piece because it was a little easier to change. But um, but this is very important for that reason because I could have very well had something get cropped off completely of the piece that was important or have to start over. Um, Next thing we need to know is number of characters. That's important because you need to know how many characters you got to fit into that space. How many people, monsters, characters don't necessarily have to be a person or a humanoid. It can be, a dragon. It could be a location, even. It could be an item. Like Lord of the Rings, the ring is a character, basically.
Can I jump in real quick? with a
Yeah,
quick
feel free to
brief
jump in
review.
whenever you need.
Oh, thank you. No, just sort of one of my, I wouldn't call it a pet peeve, but certainly a challenge that I've had to deal with over the course of illustrating for game designers who, by and large, are writers more than artists, you know? And writers tend to think about things a certain way, and artists tend to think about them a different way. Our job is to sell your book, you know? It's the writer's job to make everyone interesting. And so consequently, when writers give us, or game designers give us, a list of characters, there's often no clear visual hierarchy for us to go on as to how to make, how to put these characters on a cover in a way that makes sense and is visually, not just visually interesting, but captivating at the size of a postage stamp, so that if somebody glances at your work across a room, they won't see a mush of 11 characters. The composition
Yep.
helps with that.
Yep. And that's also why it's important to know the number of characters and the final dimensions, because most illustrators work bigger than final size, but we still got to know what the final size is to know what detail is going to be there, what's going to get lost, what's going to read. You know, I've worked on card game art, painterly card game art. So I'm talking like a painting that has to read in 1.5 inch square, you know?
Now that's
So
the best exercise. Boy, if you want to hone your skill with focal point, that is the way to do it.
yep, exactly. And value.
Yes.
And coming to that, next thing on my list is important characters and items versus not important. If you have a whole list of things on the cover or the interior piece or whichever it is, we need to know which ones to make more important. Which one's going to be in the big and in the front, which one's going to be tiny in the back. You know, if it's a lot of characters, they're not all going to be able to be equally important. It's just going to look like a jumble. Space for titles and verbiage. If you know if it's a book, you're going to have a title at the top, most likely. So we leave space in that area to be covered. Basically, we'd expect that part of the art not to show. But with card games, especially, sometimes there's little icons and symbols that you got to work out too. So we need to know, if you know where those are going to be, we need to know, or
Definitely.
we need to have or have a discussion about it in the beginning to know, especially with multiple pieces, what area to leave dull.
We are going to put the most important element of the composition right under that icon if you don't tell us.
Yep, always.
Murphy's Law of composition, always. And you know, it's funny, you have to, like, it's good to have a list like this to kind of have a checklist, because I've been in this business for 20 years, something like that, and I still have to be told to leave room enough for the title, because I'm designing posters in my head, but, like, you know, to sell at conventions. But then, oh wait, I need 6 more inches for the art director to put a title on this book.
And if the graphic designer has already done those borders, let us know. Even send us a picture of them.
Yeah,
You know?
oh, that helps so much.
I've had that problem too.
Yeah, I think we've all been victim to the the border and or graphic design situation.
Yep. Which brings us to in the discussion of full bleed or not. Is it going to go right to the edge of the page, or is there going to be like a white border or a page border or something around it? Because if it's going right to the edge of the page, we'll do a little extra art that we don't care about that'll blend off and be trimmed off. And with the borders, that's where we have what's called the live area. That's an area further in from the edges that we know is okay to put things in, important things in. That no matter what, that live area is going to be safe to put important characters or details in.
Right. Safe to put it there.
Yeah.
The operative phrase.
So are there any questions so far?
It seems like everyone is following along.
Okay. All right. So next step is the importance of thumbnails. Thumbnails are literally little thumbnail-sized sketches that we draw to decide the composition and to get an idea of it. Because they're little quick drawings, there's not a lot of importance put onto them. You know, if they don't end up getting used, we don't, you know, we're not sad, or at least not as sad.
I will say one other thing about thumbnails. I have like sent art directors a page of thumbnails and they're like, oh, well, we want to use this one for the piece in question, but we'd also like this one for this other project. So
Yep.
thumbnails are your friends.
I've had that happen. I've had a client choose part of one thumbnail and part of another and combine them, which is fine too, because I've already done it. Here, I'll put up on the extra screen here. These are some thumbnails I did for my recent book client. It's a hockey team in a rink, but you know, 3 different views, 3 different options of how to take care of this scene. You know, they're not super detailed. You can get the idea of what they are, but you know, they took very little time to do. And especially with something that has 10, 12 characters in it, they're important.
Oh, yeah. Practice that visual hierarchy. Woo!
Yep. You have anything else to add, Melissa, about thumbnails or?
Well, I would just like to say about thumbnails, it's a really I know we're going to talk about this later about focal point, but when I started out in this business, you know, my experience, I guess, as an artist was botanical illustration. So you are literally drawing what is in front of you, and there's not really one part of a plant that's more important than any other if you're like literally just transcribing plant anatomy onto a page. However, when I branched out into illustration, all of a sudden, hierarchy of visuals became very, very important. Now, when I started all this, I had no idea about focal point. But thumbnails can be a great way of really nailing your focal point in a piece. If you have like 100 little squares or whatever, 20 little squares, and you're just dealing with simple shapes, dark and light, you know, circle, triangle, whatever, you begin to think less about the fine details that you might like to do and more about sort of the visual punch you want the subject of your piece to have on the viewer. And it can be a great way of sort of retraining yourself. So I like to keep a thumbnail diary. If I have, like, I don't know, some time during the day, I will just jot down some thumbnail sketches of just whatever. You know, if I can't think of anything to thumbnail out, I will just start jotting down some shapes, just abstract forms. Anyway, it's a great way of freeing your mind as an artist and sort of not just learning to focus, but also learning to unlock your creativity a little bit. To think of pictures in a different way.
Yeah, exactly. Like that's another point I was going to talk about with thumbnails is that the more you do, the harder it is to come up with an idea for that same picture. And sometimes that harder to come up with idea is the perfect one. You know,
Exactly.
it gets you to push to get new ideas, new angles, new approaches. For example, the three I have on the screen there, I didn't do just three. I did probably 20. You know, and these I cleaned up a little so the client could read them.
Yeah, oh yeah. Gosh, I always have
So,
to remember to do that. Sometimes I don't remember to do that, and then my client is like, what?
it depends on the
One,
client too. Like this one I know can read some of my scratchier ones. Sorry,
yes.
go ahead.
No, that's okay. One of my favorite webcomic artists. Do you know Wondermark, the webcomic? David Malky, I believe, is the writer illustrator of that. It's really cool. He said he likes to not just find the first idea that pops into his head for the joke. He likes to find the fifth idea, because you get through the expected in those first 4 times, and then everything after that is something fresh and exciting and unexpected that's going to be much more interesting to your audience.
Exactly. So why don't we move into our next point then, unless somebody has some questions about
We
thumbnails.
do have a question. Well, not specifically about thumbnails, but
Or about
specifically, right. There's currently a question that has to do with working with a client or an art manager. So from Mindless Indulgent 1985, we have, how do artists work together with people that are doing layout for an RPG book, or do these two people not interact at all?
It depends on the company, honestly. It different companies are going to have their different sort of workflow, and you just are flexible about that. But if you have any question about the layout, generally speaking, you can always ask them or ask your point of contact, whether it's an art director or the game designer directly. You can always say, hey, where's the title going to go? Where's the little logo going to go? What about the author names? It's you can always get information just by asking.
Yeah. No, never be afraid to ask. I ask questions constantly. Well, I mean, it depends really on the project and what the client knows already. Big companies, you may not have as much access. I have some friends who work for like Marvel and DC, and they say, and like pencilers say they've never talked to the inker, they've never met the inker,
Right.
you know, or the colorist, you know.
You have to rely on your project director.
Yeah, but you know, it doesn't hurt to reach out, and if they don't answer, well, then you make your best guess, and if it's something that's permanent, they're stuck with it.
Right. You have done your due diligence. That's the important thing. I can't get in trouble.
Any other questions?
That's it for right now.
Okay. Okay, so next we were going to go to focal point. Basically, focal point is where you want the viewer's eye to be drawn. Like using certain visual language, we can make it so the viewer's eye goes exactly where we want it to go, whether they know it or not.
It's magic.
And for instance, I'm going to skip around a little in the outline here, but eye lines. Eye lines are a good way to get the viewer where you want. So where a character is looking makes the viewer look that direction.
Human nature.
Yep.
Unavoidable. Don't do it if you don't want the viewer to look there.
Exactly. The direction of like a character's head or angles of their shoulders can create essentially visual arrows or diagonal lines that also direct the viewer a certain way. Like if you look at the thumbnails I have up there, the third one, which I have as the center line on the ice of the hockey ring, yeah, it's just a center line on the ice, but it's pointing to the two center figures. That's not accidental. You know, it can be sometimes, but in this case, it wasn't. And the stands on the side, they point towards that line that points towards the center. You know, little tricks like that, while they're simple, do a lot to get the viewer where they want to go, where you want them to go.
Sometimes it only takes a simple trick or visual device. Sometimes we have a tendency to overthink, I think, is illustrators, particularly as people that maybe like rendering a lot of picky detail. Maybe we tend to overthink and forget the power of, like, a black triangle against a white circle. You mentioned value earlier.
Yes.
Value, super focal point pull. Anything that is sort of the lightest value on your page, and by value I just mean light or dark. The lightest value against the darkest value will always draw the eye immediately, especially if there's a hard edge there instead of a soft edge. Fun tricks like that.
Okay. Well, I assume what you talked about. My my connection got a little jumpy there, but I have a general idea what you were talking about. So,
good.
So if so let's move on to more things about focal point then, and good composition. Avoid placing items directly on the center line. While that'll get your person to look, that'll get the viewer to look right at that item, it looks kind of boring. If everything's in the center all the time, it doesn't really, it's not dynamic, it doesn't have any flow to it, it's just kind of there. Sometimes that's what you want, so it can be used effectively, but sparingly for a pleasing image.
For games, especially. I mean, I think everybody wants to convey a certain amount of action with their game, even if it's a very thought-provoking, contemplative game. There's always some sort of action happening on the cover.
Yeah. Yeah, actually, I think I'll jump around a little more again. Just made this outline, so this way is flowing a little better, so I'm going to switch it up a little. Okay, so next on the screen, we'll go to the rule of thirds. Is a design composition. If you can see the intersecting lines on my shared screen there. A good way to, can you see my arrow move? My cursor move? Or is it just the flat screen?
It's just the flat screen.
Okay. So where the lines intersect and make the plus type symbols, putting your focal point on one of those adds a nice relaxed composition. You know, it gives you, it makes it more interesting. Crossing two of them can make it even more dynamic. And putting anything on one of those intersections is a real good way for a quick, solid composition. For instance, like on the two left ones. I could have a big figure covering the two left crosses, and then I could have a little figure like quarter of the screen in the size, put them on the top right, and I could have a nice dynamic perspective working there. I'd open up Photoshop, but I don't think my stream can handle it. You have anything to add on that, Melissa?
No, that's I love to play with stuff like that, with the intersecting lines and compositional elements, and I think that's really cool. I think it's a good reminder also that, you know, we don't have to reinvent the wheel every single time we make a composition. We can use these simple principles that are tried and tested and come up with something different in them, without necessarily having to rebuild the whole thing from scratch every time.
Exactly. Like the next thing I put on the screen, oops, that's a little big. Put on the screen here is an example of the golden ratio. Similar to the rule of thirds, if you keep cutting your space into thirds and cut the next space into thirds and the next space into thirds, that is a ratio that exists in nature, in like conch shells and everything like that, and it tends to lead to a very pleasing composition. For me, it's for my taste, it tends to be a little too mathematical sometimes.
I find that almost the golden ratio tends to be perfectly fine.
But that's just another example of placement, and just knowing about this, you don't have to, you know, draw all the lines, do all the calculations and everything. Just know that something roughly this size next to something roughly this size is going to make a nice, pleasing image.
I didn't see this on your outline, but maybe I could just like jump in real quick.
Absolutely.
Okay, this is one of those things that you sort of want to work out on your thumbnail diary and not necessarily on a composition for an art director. But Andrew Loomis and his creative illustration book, one of the iconic textbooks of our industry, he talked a lot about compositions based on letters and numbers. And because those are kind of like alphabets are kind of the pinnacle of perfect graphic design. And you can actually sort of compose your picture based on like just some of those indications. And I think that's just really interesting to think about. So, you know, when you're thinking golden ratio, maybe you think, oh, a nice S curve might go well here, or yeah, just cool stuff like that. You can sort of go through classic paintings and find the S curves. It's a fun game to play at museums. And every now and then you'll find a T or like the letter A or something. It's pretty cool. You know, the Last Supper by Leonardo. There's a big nice A in the middle. So, anyway.
Yep. Yeah, I'm a huge Andrew Loomis fan.
Awesome.
For like with things like the letter shapes and you referring to classical art for compositions, really DK, who makes a lot of kids instructional books, they have one titled composition. DK, the letters DK. They make a lot of those like informational books for kids. Like they're expensive. Sometimes they're like $30 for a cheap hardcover kids book. But there's an older one on composition that is a nice overview of different classical artists and the compositions entailed.
I dropped my tablet. I will vanish for just a second.
Okay.
Okay.
Do we have any questions?
Our people are just chatting about their own personal favorite resources for golden ratio and photography.
Oh, nice. Yeah. Yeah, the golden ratio is used, and the rule of thirds are very often used in photography. Definitely. All right, so we'll move on then. With different, also for focal points and to give variety in your image is a variety of shapes. Like have some square things, have some round things, have triangular things. Those differences, even if it's just the motion of a character or the position of their arms make like a triangle or anything like that, that gives variety to the piece and makes it easier to separate those images in the piece and make them different sizes. Everything the same size is boring. If you had like 3 circles in a row, but if you had big circle, then a smaller circle.
Jack, you there?
Yeah. Okay. What was the last thing you heard?
Circles of all the same size are boring.
Okay. So like 3 equal size circles on a page in a row are going to be boring to look at. But if you would make them 3 different sizes and put them in those different spots, it'll be a much more pleasing image. So, you can have like, let me draw on the back of my page here. Like, that's. Can you even see this?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's kind of boring. But if you do 3 different sizes, that's already a much more pleasing composition if you can read it.
We can.
And if you overlap them, or at least 2 out of 3,
that's where I was
be
going
even
next. So and then we got like the different shapes, the different sizes, and the overlapping. And that's already, I mean, anybody can see that's much more pleasing to the eye. And we're not saying you're just using simple shapes in your composition, but it definitely makes it, everything has that general shape to it. People are overall tend to be a little cylindrical, but their position can make them triangular.
Or their clothes.
Yep, their clothes. Things like that.
If you let's see, wait, what's the name of it? Picture This by Molly Bang. That is a great book for talking about how simple shapes can be put together and make impactful pictorial compositions. I love that book. I sleep with it under my pillow.
Nice. Any questions on that?
We're following along.
No? Okay. So next I have on my list is hard versus soft edges. When you're rendering, a hard edge is like a line or anything that comes to a line, and a soft edge is something that tends to blend out and not be as sharp. So this right here, this shading that I did, I don't know if you can see it.
Yeah.
The one side is hard and the other side is soft. That hard edge can help bring focus to it, but the soft edge is less important in this case. It can be used the opposite
Lost
way too, but that's a little more difficult. But oh, am I back?
Yes.
You are
Can you hear me?
Yes. It can be used in the
Okay.
opposite way too, but that's a little more difficult. Is that what you said?
Yeah, I find it a little more difficult to draw the eye with the soft edge than the hard edge.
Me too.
But it can be done. It's just not. Which brings me to my last part in focal point, which is my favorite of the perspectives, atmospheric perspective,
Yes.
sometimes called aerial perspective. Atmospheric perspective is the one that doesn't have any rulers or lines or mechanical end to it. Atmospheric perspective is the further in the distance something gets, the less sharp and the less vibrant it is. So things up close will have more detail and more clean edges, and things that are further away will have softer edges, less detail. The colors will be less saturated. And that create what's that?
I said more blue shift if you're in a terrestrial environment as you recede into the distance.
Yep, exactly. And it creates depth very well, and you can use it to focus everything in there, everything in your image, and you can actually use it. Normally, it's close is sharp, further away is soft, but you can also use it like in the opposite way a little bit, with an extreme close item in shadow would be less saturated and less sharp than something in the middle, and you can therefore use the foreground to push it in the middle ground.
Reverse atmospheric perspective is so cool. I don't know if I'm good enough to pull it off, but I try every now and then.
I've sketched it here and there. It hasn't always worked, but
James Gurney in Color and Light has a good chapter on detailing it, and every now and then I read it like once a month.
He has a really good website, blog community thing too, called Gurney's Journey.
Gurney, yeah.
And like all kinds of people, all kinds of artists can post on there. I have at one point I saw a nice example of him explaining the cover to one of the Driss novels and the perspective he used and everything like that.
I saw that one. Yeah, that was cool.
So who else is good? Michael Whalen is very good at that type of stuff too. He did the cover art for the entire Wheel of Time series, pretty much, right? Or did he? No, he took over for Wheel of Time.
Yeah, after Daryl K. Sweet died, he did all the remaining covers, and he
took over.
Fantastic.
And I think he's done the cover for every Sanderson book, though. I feel like, or worked on every Sanderson book.
Dando Santos, who is a protege of Michael Whalen. Like the Warbreaker stuff, that was Dando Santos. He has a lot of really similar qualities to his art, though.
Okay, so I'm about to move on to the next subject. Any questions before I move on?
We're good.
Okay. Perspective. A lot of artists don't like it because it's very mathematical, but learn it. You don't have to learn all of it, but learn 1, 2, and 3 point perspective. At least how it works. So even if you're just eyeing it, you know why something is wrong. I use perspective in a lot of my pieces. Let me see. So here's some thumbnails I did for another piece in the book. It has different angles, different focal points. The one the author chose was the 4th one, and here's where it is so far. the pencil of it. That's a 3-point perspective for you there. Can you see it?
It's not sharing.
Mm.
Really want to see it.
Did you see the thumbnails?
Initially, yes, those thumbnails showed up fine. Here we go.
Okay, so the first thumbnail there is a basically a 1-point perspective where everything goes into a point in the background. The second is very close up, but it's essentially a 2-point perspective. The third is another 1-point perspective, basically. And the fourth is a 3-point perspective. And then I'll move over to this is where the drawing is at the moment, the pre-ink stage. Can you see it?
It hasn't switched over. I don't think.
Right, there it goes. At least I see it. Do you see it? Oh, okay. So yeah, perspective.
Cool.
Generally, can you see it now? Let me know when it pops up. It's not for like cityscapes and stuff like that. Yeah, you're gonna need the mechanical drawing going. But I find digital is much easier for setting it up because sometimes your vanishing points in perspective are like 3 feet away from your picture space, so you can do it virtually. I will do a perspective grid a lot lately, where I'll take the 3 points and I'll draw intersecting lines into a grid, and then just loosely draw on top of that grid rather than go nuts with all the perspective.
That's what I like to do as well. Initially, since this is Design and Composition 101, I would just like to say for everyone out there that is just starting out, practice perspective, because then you won't get to like my age and have to look up how do I draw a 3-point perspective again every single time you use it. Just get it into your head now.
Yeah. Oh, what was the name of the book?
I Google it every time and say, oh yeah, that's how I do it. Yes, okay, I'm good. So you can do it that way, or you can learn it.
I'm using a perspective for comic artists.
Nice.
And did it catch up?
Yeah, you're good.
So yeah, I've been using that book. Okay.
That's a great.
And some of my current pieces are leaning towards the curvilinear perspective, and that's hurting me. But now we're into 4 and 5-point perspective, and no straight lines in all compasses. And it's breaking my brain a little.
But it's gonna be so cool once it's done.
Yeah, exactly. So, but when it comes to 1, 2, and 3-point perspective, once you get the idea of it, it's not super hard.
Right.
And where, especially with like hard-edged lines and furniture and stuff like that, you really need to know where it's going or it's going to look weird.
Mm-hmm.
Is my picture showed up yet? My sketch?
I can see it.
Okay, so my sketch is a 3-point perspective. Pretty far out. My page actually has extra pages taped to the sides for the vanishing points. They fold out when I need them. But into a nice composition. And sometimes things like this are important because my direction for this scene was kids getting ready in the locker room before a game. I'm like, that's so boring. It's so boring. But you do little weird angles and stuff to, to get more out of it.
I feel like you can
They're
make
having,
literally anything interesting with a weird enough angle.
yeah, exactly. Exactly.
So for the 101 and the 101 part, can you please quickly define what you mean by 1, 2, and 3-point perspective?
Okay. Draw a little sketch here. So every drawing has basically has a horizon line. That's the part where the sky and the well, not every drawings have a horizon line. That's where the ground meets the sky. Even if you're indoors, there's still a point where the ground meets where the sky would be. Off of that horizon line, which I'll draw on each of these here. Okay, so here's the first two sketches. I have boxes with horizon lines on them. I think this text is showing through the back.
It is.
Point perspective.
Oh, great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
One point, everything goes from one spot in the distance, spreads out. So where the point is, that's where everything converges. And up front, like the figures will be bigger, and if you're drawing figures in it, they'll get smaller and smaller and smaller as they go back. Let me see. I think one of my sketches here is. So is my sketch showing up?
Not yet.
Okay, so the center thumbnail here is 1-point perspective, where everything's going to a point in the distance, and the figures up front are getting are bigger, and they get smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller to the point where right up front here is a goalie who's like a third of the height of the page, and then in the back here, and like towards the top in the back distance, there's a goalie who's like half an inch tall. But that's how perspective works with that. 2-point perspective is this one here. Oh, you do? Okay. 2-point perspective is everything from the two dots and converge in the center, and that's usually when you're going to see the front and side and maybe a little of the top of an item. You'll use that. 3-point perspective, you're not dealing with just angles on the left and the right. You're dealing with angles going up and down too. So brings us into another part of our, which something I was going to mention later anyway. Worm's eye versus bird's eye view. They're just like they sound. Worm's eye is what an item looks like from the point of view of a worm, and bird's eye is what something looks like from the point of view of a bird flying overhead. So 3-point perspective is used mostly for those two views. Like bird's eye. Can you still hear me?
Yeah.
Hello? Am I back? Okay. So what was the last thing you heard?
Bird's eye, worm's eye.
Okay, did you hear what the explanation of the two?
No.
Okay. Bird's eye is what the view from a bird flying overhead, what the bird sees.
Oh, we did hear that. I think you were going to talk about how they were used to communicate things in 3-point perspective.
So in 3-point perspective, bird's eye is looking at the top of a skyscraper going down. The roof is really big, but the bottom of the skyscraper gets really small. Something like this third one here. Is looking at something really big ahead of you, which can be used for people too. So for worm's eye, a very simplified person here, worm's eye would be this guy here, where his feet are really big, but he gets really small towards the head.
Worm's eye on me.
There you go. Use the camera effectively.
Bird's
Nice.
eye on me. There you go. There we go. Now everyone's dizzy.
Is my screen still sharing?
Yes. Your 3 thumbnails are back up.
Okay. Okay, so here's another one I was working on, different thumbnails. This one's a little bit of a worm's eye, where they get smaller as they go away. Can you see that? So we're running out of time, so this is also what is called a tilt shot, where the ground isn't exactly even. You give it a little bit of a tilt.
I love tilt shots.
Yeah, tilt shots are my favorite. I use them far too often. It's where you tilt. It's like if you were watching a movie, it's where the camera is tilted a little, and it gives such more drama to the piece, to the item.
Totally.
Do you have any more questions?
So far, we're following along.
Can I give a book recommendation that I like? I'm book recommendation girl today.
Absolutely.
So I found that a book called Framed Ink by Marcos Mateo Mestre has a really great discussion of not just the different perspectives, but when to use them and what they convey in terms of storytelling. Like,
nice.
Filmmakers tend to use them in specific ways, and we as visual storytellers can also, piggyback onto these this visual language, because everybody subconsciously knows it, and it triggers things subconsciously in your viewer.
Yeah, a lot of the language of different compositions actually comes from film now.
Right. Yeah, film. I mean, that is our poetry now.
Hello?
Yep, we got you.
Okay. Yeah, for instance, like the establishing shot is a wide shot of where you are, of the location, basically. I forget what it used to be called in illustration, but it used to have a different name. But now they just use establishing shot because
we all know what that means.
Everybody knows it.
Can you please repeat the book title again?
Oh, sure. It's called Framed Ink.
I think there's 2 of them, right?
There's yes. There's volume 1 and volume 2 by Marcos Mateo Mestre. It's MATEU-MESTRE.
Another thing that I like to do if you're stuck on a composition, which with this book with all the hockey teams and everything like that was tough because they're all vertical orientation. So I got to
Wow.
fit 10, 20 characters in a vertical orientation,
Oh,
and it starts to get redundant and boring. So what I started doing is when I was watching the new Voltron cartoon. It's a
love
team, it's
Voltron.
a team show. Joaquin Dos Santos, who used to work on Legend of Korra as well, has great composition. The figures in different points in space, far back. So I started watching that because it's constantly got tons and tons of characters on the screen. I mean, they're all horizontal, so I had to figure that out. But
Yeah.
but it has tons of characters on the screen, and I just started watching it and sketching those compositions just roughly, and it started getting my mind working and coming up with new ideas of how to approach mine.
That is a great idea. Absolutely.
On that note, we are unfortunately out of time for this
And
panel.
it doesn't have to be a
Thank you for calling us.
Yeah. Can we please get your information so
Thank
we
you.
can find you online digitally and possibly throw money at you?
Hey!
Hey, money.
Well, I am. There we go.
Go ahead.
Okay. That would be so easy. I'm Melissa Gay. My website is melissagay.com. So yay, easy. I am at Patreon, just Melissa Gay, MELISSAGAY. You can find me on Instagram at Melissa Gay Art. And on Twitter, I'm at melissagay23. And on Facebook, I'm melissa.gay.art.
My name is Jack Parra. That's last name's Parra. You can get me at let's see if this is readable. Probably not.
We really want it to be
No,
readable.
it's not though. You can get me at jackparra.artist@gmail.com, or my website is jackparra.com. I'm also on the Discord channel here. You can hit me there if you're still on it. Yeah, that's about it.
Awesome. Thank you, Jack. You gave such a great outline of this whole topic. It was a pleasure.
Thank you. This is the first time I've done this one, so I think I made a longer outline than I needed.
Yeah. Better to have more than too little.